We begin with the topic of kinyonic zela, which is an amazing concept in and of itself, that a gazlan could actually make a kinyan on the object. Meaning the Torah says, "Veheshiv zela shar gazal," that if you steal something, you have to return it. Obviously, it means it's not yours, it belongs to the nigzal. However, at some point, the halacha recognizes a kinyan on the object to such an extent that the Gazlan no longer has to return that object. Now, let's keep in mind on the side, and this is not the main point for our discussion, that the Gazlan will in any event have to pay the nigzal, the value of the object. So we're not dealing with the actual tashlum, the compensation for the gzela. We're dealing with the be'en meaning the physical object. Now, how does the Gazlan acquire ownership over the gzela to such extent that it no longer belongs to the nigzal and the gazlan will no longer have to return it? So that's called shinui. Shinui means that he changes the object. Like, let's say, for example, he steals chitim, kernels of wheat, and he converts them into flour. So in such a case, he has to pay the value of the kernels that he stole, but he doesn't have to return them because, so to speak, they no longer exist, which means that the Gazlan has acquired ownership of it. So if we talk about the creation of a kinyan, in this case, we have a complex halacha that has two parts. He starts with the Maisig Zela, in which he steals it, and then he goes on to the second pu'ula, the second action, which is shinui, where he changes the object. And A plus B gives him acquisition over the object. And the Gemara Bava Kama Daf Samech Vav derives this from a pasuk, Veheshiv Zela Asher Gazal. And the Gemara says that Asher Gazal teaches me Ke'ein HaChefetz Shegazal, meaning it still is primarily the same object that he stole. But if that object is no longer because he made a shinui, then there's no longer Veheshiv Zela. Now, this pasuk Veheshiv Zela is not talking about Kinyonic Zela. It's talking about the Chiv Hashava. In other words, the Torah imposes on the Gazlan an obligation to return the object that he stole, unless it was nishtana, unless it was changed. So how then do we learn from the pasuk Veheshiv Zela Sher Gazal about Kinyonic Zela? And Rabbi Chanan Wasserman postulates that the only thing that prevents the Gazlan from making a kinyan is the fact that there are strings attached between the object and its owner, the nigzal. If you can cut those strings, then automatically the Gazlan owns the object. So what are those strings that attach the object to the nigzal? It's the chiyuv hashava. The Torah says you have to give it back. If you have to return the object that you stole, then obviously the original owner, the nigzal, is still connected to the object. But now that we've established that we can cut off that connection between the nigzal and the object by changing the object and being mafkir the din of hashava, there's no longer a din of hashava to return that object. So memela, that's the key word here, memela, it's kanui. Memela belongs to the Gazlan. So really, the Gazlan up front from the get-go should have been able to acquire ownership, but the Torah says that you have to return the object, and that's called Veheshiv Zela Sher Gazal, and that removes his kinyan, because you can't own something and at the same time have to return it to someone else. That's not ownership. But if we could be mafkia the chiyuv hashava, then we go back to square one and it belongs to you. So really the Maisa Kinyan itself by which the Gazlan acquires ownership is the Maisa Gzela, the act of theft. Just that there's a barrier that prevents the Maisa Gzela from generating a Chalos Kinyan and acquisition on the part of the Gazlan. What is that barrier? The barrier is that the Torah imposes upon the Gazlan a Chiyuv Hashava. If we could only remove that barrier, meaning the Chiyuv Hashava, then Memela automatically it belongs to the Gazlan by virtue of his Maisa Gzela. So in that sense, Shinui is really not part of the acquisition. The Shinui only acts in a sort of negative way to neutralize the Chiyuv Hashava. Once you neutralize the Chiyuv Hashava, then automatically, as we said before, the Maisa Gzela does what it has to do, and it creates a kinyan. However, although that's the approach of Rabbi Chanan, we're going to suggest here a second approach based on something that I heard from my Rebbe. And he says that there's something called Shinui Hashem. So if you're looking on page 122, you'll see the second line in the second paragraph. We quote a Gemara in Bava Kama called Yeush V'Shinui Hashem. Now let's understand, Shinui Hashem is a little bit different than the Shinui that we spoke about earlier. Shinui Hashem means passing it on to a third party. So Ruvain was the Nigzal, Shimon was the Gazan who stole it from Ruvain, and now Shimon passes it on to Levi. And that's called Shinui Hashem because now it's in the possession of Levi. And Rav Yosef establishes in the Gemara in Bava Kama that Shinui Hashem is only kona, is only effective if it's combined with Yeush, which means that the Nigzal, Ruvain, whose cow was stolen, gave up hope. He despaired of ever getting it back. So now we're saying the following, that we start with the Maisa Gzela, we go on to Shinui Hashem, and in the middle there somewhere, we have what we call Yeush. So we have like three elements here that eventually combined efforts will generate a kinyan on behalf of the Gazlan. So we're going to suggest the following, that according to Rav Yosef, Yeush per se would not be effective as a kinyan. And not only that, Shinui Hashem itself is not effective as a kinyan. Now, we have a principle in mathematics, in Halacha 2, that 0 plus 0 equals 0. So if Yeush cannot effectuate a kinyan, and that's 0, Shinui Hashem cannot effectuate a kinyan, so that's also 0. How does the combination thereof generate a kinyan, a valid kinyan? So to answer this problem, we're going to suggest the following, that the kinyan really inheres in the Shinui Hashem. The Shinui Hashem itself is the kinyan. And that means that Shinui Hashem is sort of like a Maisa kinyan. It's a kinyan in and of itself. And the reason for that is that although there's no physical change in the object, like we said in the case where he converts kernels into flour, the chayfetz is exactly identical as it was before. But nevertheless, the shinui is meaningful in terms of the relationship between the object and its owner. Take, for example, the following case of Shini Hashem. A person steals tevel. Tevel means it's before hafrashas trumas and maisros. And now, after he steals the tevel, he's mafresh truma and passes the truma on to the Kohen. And we said that Shini Hashem is not sufficient without Yeush. So as long as Ruvain, the owner of the Tvua, is not Misyayish, then no one could make a kinyan on it. Because the very fact that Ruvain, who honestly owns the object, truly owns the object, he's looking to get his object back. He's putting up signs all over the place. If anybody knows the whereabouts of my object, then he still has a relationship to his object. So we need two things now to happen. Number one, we have to cut off the relationship between the owner, Ruvain, and the object, and that we accomplish through Yeush. When Ruvain says, you know what, I'm not running around looking for the Gazlan. I don't even have a chance in a million of finding the Gazlan. And even if I find the Gazlan, he'll probably knock my block off. So he gives up hope. Now, once he gives up hope, we have removed the connection between Ruvain, the Bailim, the owner of the object, and the object itself, because he's no longer seeking his object. At that point, Yeush removes the barrier that prevents the Shini Hashem from achieving its goal. So again, let's go over this one more time. We're suggesting that the Shinui is in itself the Maisa Kinyan, not the way Rabbi Chanan said it. Rabbi Chanan thought the Maisa Gzela is really the Kinyan, and the barrier is the mitzvah or the chiyuv of hashava. So once through Shinui, we get rid of the chiyuv hashava, Mamela, the original Gzela effectuates the Kinyan. Now we're saying something totally different. We're saying that the Maisa Gzela really in and of itself is not a Maisa Kinyan. The Maisa Kinyan is the Shinui. That itself is the Kinyan. The only problem is that Kinyan faces a barrier, a blockage. What blocks that Kinyan of Shini Hashem? It's the fact that the Bailim are running around looking for the object. They haven't given up hope, and that connects them to the object. But if there's Yeush, and now the Bailim have pulled away their connection to the object, now all coast is clear for the Maisa Shinui to effectuate the Kinyan. So just to summarize here, in terms of our what we call halacha murkeves, what we're saying is that whether or not you take Rebbe Chanan's approach or you take the approach of my Rebbe, in both cases, we're emphasizing one particular Maisa, and what inheres in that Maisa is the ability for that Maisa to effectuate a Kinyan. All the other elements that are necessary in order for the Kinyan to be Chal are really external to the Maisa Kinyan, whether it's the removal of the Chovas Hashava according to Rabbi Chanan, because the Chovas Hashava presents a barrier and a blockage for the Maisa Kinyan of Gzela to be Chal, but the Maisa Kinyan is the Gzela itself, or alternatively, it's the Maisa Shinui that really effectuates the Kinyan. But the fact that the Bailim are still holding out hope and they haven't been Misyayish, that connects the object to the Bailim, and it's a blockage preventing the Shinui from being Chal. Okay, now we want to go on to page 123, and that's the mitzvah of Daled Kosos. So the Gemara says that the first kos of the four kosos is the mitzvah of Kiddush. And now on the night of Pesach, the Makadesh, who recites the Kiddush, he has to drink what's called Kimole Lugmov, which is like half of a mouthful. Now, what is the purpose of the Makadesh drinking that Moli Lugmov? Well, the mitzvah of Kiddush is not just on the night of Pesach. The mitzvah of Kiddush applies the whole year round, on any Shabbos, on any Yom Tov. And in order for the Kiddush to be connected to the kos, we need a shtia, a drinking of the kos, and the minimum amount of, let's call it wine that he's drinking, has to be Kimoli Lugmov. So l'chora, this shtia, this drinking, has nothing to do with the mitzvah of Dalid Kosos. It really has to do with Kiddush, the mitzvah of Kiddush the whole year round. So let's read this inside, if you don't want, on page 123. You all have it, right? Yeah. Mitzvah's Kiddush, B'leil Shabbos v'yontiv, he ha-bracha v'lo shtiyas hayayin. So why does the Makadesh have to drink the wine? Somebody has to drink the wine, not necessarily the Makadesh, because anyone at the table is Yotzei, he fulfills his mitzvah Kiddush by listening to the Kiddush. The only reason we need shtia, and again, it doesn't have to be the shtia of the Makadesh per se, is to connect the Amiras Habracha, the Amiras Kiddush, to the Kos. So the linkage to connect the Kiddush to the Kos is the shtia. Now, if we apply this on the night of Pesach, then we have 4 kosos on the night of Pesach. Each kos has its own bracha. And the Gemara says, Dalid kosos tiknu chachamim, kol chada v'chada mitzvah b'diape nafshe. It means that each kos is a separate mitzvah unto itself. If that be the case, then it's very possible that the requirement of shtia with regard to the Dalid Kosos of bracha, right, 4 different brachos on Leil Pesach, is exactly identical to the mitzvah of shtia, the requirement of shtia with regard to Kiddush the whole year round. And therefore, Tosfos says that we don't have to supply the Balabayis, if he's an ani, with enough wine so that every person sitting at the Seder table should have his cup of wine. It's not necessary, says Tosfos. All we need is for one person, let's call him the Makadesh, to receive the wine, and he'll make the bracha, multiply it by 4 times he'll make the bracha, and anybody at the table could drink the wine, but not everybody has to have their own cup of wine. That's what Tosfos presents. At the end, Tosfos rejects it, but that was the beginning of Tosfos, at the very beginning of Arvei Pesach. So Reb Chaim says, I don't get it. Tosfos wants to compare Dalid Kosos to Kiddush the whole year round. The Kiddush the whole year round, the mitzvah is the bracha. And the shtia is only secondary, as we said, it's a t'nai, in order to link up the bracha with the kos. And therefore, since the emphasis or the essence of the mitzvah Kiddush is the recitation of the bracha, then we apply the principle of Shomer Ka'ona. But, says Reb Chaim, in the case of Dalid Kosos, the mitzvah is not the bracha, but rather the mitzvah is the shtia, the drinking of the kos, which is called derech cherus. In other words, to demonstrate that we are free of slavery. So again, hasam a mitzvah there, and the rest of the year, Kiddush, the mitzvah is a bracha. And therefore, Shomer Ka'ona applies because he heard the bracha. Avol bi'arba kosos, ikar mitzvah hi, shel daled kosos, my shaykh lahotzi bazeh. I think there's a word missing here. If you want to fill it in, it's a typo. Ikar mitzvah hi shtiyasam. It should say shtiyasam shel adalid kosos. Now, just to finish this up, the Griz, that's Reb Chaim's younger son, Rav Yitzchak Zev, proves that according to both the Rambam and the Ramban, it's not enough that you drink the kos of Mole Lugmov, but rather you have to drink Rov kos. So let's say you have a long, very large cup. So Mole Lugmov is just a fraction of the kos. And that would certainly be sufficient the whole year round. But on the night of Pesach, there's halach of drinking Rov kos, the majority of the wine in the cup. And the answer is because the mitzvah on the night of Pesach is shtiyas hakos, is drinking the kos. And in order to say that you drank the kos, you have to drink most of the kos. Whereas in the case of Kiddush the whole year round, the mitzvah is really the amiras habracha, and the shtiyah is just a secondary condition to link up the bracha to the kos. So it comes out now that in Dalid Kosos on Leil Pesach we have, again with regard to each one of the Kosos, a halacha murkeves. It has two parts to it. Number one, it's the bracha. And number two, it's the shtiyas hakos.
Berzan,
Yeah.
can I clarify one thing?
Yeah,
Which
please.
we had a discussion by tefillah where it could, but where it could be complex because you need to have kavana and you need to say the words, but at the same time, the other side said that they were kind of intrinsic to each other. Is it not that all brachas are the same way? And such, you wouldn't need to have the kos. You could just say because it's a bracha, it's complex.
Again, let's just go over. In tefillah, we said you have a complex mitzvah because the kiyum of tefillah depends upon a combination of two elements. First of all, the action of speech, right? Prayer requires recitation. And number two, the kavana that you're standing in front of the Shekhinah. We said that there was another kavana that was not part of the halacha merkeves, and that's kavanas pirush hamilos. And that only applies in the first bracha. That's an absolute requirement in the first bracha. Now, if you're asking in general about brachos,
Yeah.
I would say that in general, all brachos require kavana, and therefore every bracha is really, to the same extent that tefillah is a complex mitzvah, so too every bracha is a complex mitzvah.
So if that's the case, why are we asking if this is a complex mitzvah based on the kos?
No, we're asking above and beyond bracha as tefillah, and that equation, that analogy, what about the shtia of the kos, the drinking of the kos? Is that also part of the essence of the mitzvah?
Oh, I see.
And here Rav Chaim wants to say that it depends. If you're talking about Kiddush the whole year round, then shtia is not part of the essential halacha because the mitzvah is the bracha. But if you're talking about Dalid Kosos on Leil Pesach, there, claims Reb Chaim, the shtia, the drinking of the kos, is part of the essence of the mitzvah. So with regard to Dalid Kosos, we have a complex halach made up of number one, the bracha, number two, the shtia. With regard to Kiddush the whole year round, or for that matter, any kosher bracha, it's not a complex halach. There's only one requirement. And that requirement is going to be the bracha itself.
Yeah, I understand.
The shtia is only to facilitate the bracha and make it a bracha on the kos. Of course, you have the bracha and you have the kos. What connects them? You need a connector. By the way, if on the side in Lumdis, there's a big concept called a mitzaref. And if you're interested in that, take a look in Hagige O's. In the back of the book, there's something called a maftech nosim, which is a table of all the topics, and look under Siruf or Metzaref. I forget exactly whether it's with a mem or it's a tzadi. You'll find it there. Because the concept of a Metzaref comes up over and over again in Hagigeos. All right, let's talk about Afir. What's Afir? Afir is one of the 39 malachas, and it requires two parts. One part is active, and the other is passive. The active part is putting the dough into the oven, which is called hachnosas hapas latanur. The passive part is not taking it out until after it's baked. Baking in halacha is called krimas pnei hapas. There's a certain kind of like the dough is liquidy, it's soft, spongy, and it becomes hard on the top. So once it starts getting hard on the top, that's called afir. L'chora, at first glance, we don't have here halacha merkeves. There's really one and only one part to the violation of afir, and that is putting the dough into the oven. However, you have a possibility of removing the dough from the oven before it bakes, and then you undermine and cancel and negate the afir. But if, let's say, in the meantime, before it actually bakes, you're out to lunch somewhere, that doesn't matter. We don't need you to actively be there for it to bake. So that's what it says over here on the third line. The Avera Nigmara, the Avera is already complete. Takef umiyad, immediately, even before the bread is baked. What we need is a t'nai. There's got to be a condition that the bread eventually has to bake. Otherwise, you never baked anything. But now we want to look into a sefer called the Iglei Tal. I'll say a few words about the Iglei Tal in a minute, but let's just see what he wants to suggest here. What happens if Shabbos goes out at 7 p.m.? He puts the dough into the oven at 6:59. And the baking of the dough is only completed with krimas pnei hapas at 7:01. Comes along the Iglei Tal, and he says in such a case he's chayav. Why is he chayav? Because the Avera was complete when he put the dough into the oven. And that has to take place, obviously, on Shabbos. But the condition that ultimately it be baked, that could take place even after Shabbos. For example, one of the 39 malachas is Zoreah. Now, if you put a seed into the ground, you can theoretically rip it out of the ground. So you're only going to complete the Zriya with Hashrosha. Hashrosha means when it takes root. But it takes 3 days until the Hashrosha is finalized. So it won't be until Tuesday that you'll find out that the Zriya was a valid, permanent Zriya. But nevertheless, it's one of the 39 malachas. So obviously, says the Iglei Tal, you can complete the malacha after Shabbos if the Maisa Vera and the act of the malacha was implemented on Shabbos itself. Rav Soloveitchik wants to say no, that the malacha itself is only completed with krimas haponim. And this you'll see on page 123 if you want to see it inside, about 5 lines up from the bottom of the page. I hear some background noise. Is that because the
That,
door?
no, it's outside the door. I just closed the door to try and make it better. It's just a loud conversation.
Oh, okay. The Gemara asks the following question in Masechta Shabbos on Daf Daled. A person put the dough into the oven on Shabbos. Now, there's something called Ridias Hapas. Ridias Hapas means taking the dough out of the oven. Ridias Hapas is only Durabanan. It's not a Malacha Doraisa. And the Gemara wants to know if he put the pas into the oven on Shabbos, is he allowed, once he reminds himself, oh no, it's Shabbos, to remove the pas from the oven and do a Ridias Hapas, which is also the Rabbanan. And the Gemara wants to know, can we justify a violation of an Isa Drabanan for the sake of saving a person from a Chiyuv Misa Doraisa, from a real, bona fide, severe Isa Doraisa? So Rav Soloveitchik wants to derive from that Gemara that the Gemara Avera, the Avera is not complete until the dough bakes. Because otherwise, what is the Gemara saying? That, he could maybe take out the dough. The very fact that the Gemara raises the possibility that you could take out the dough before it bakes means that the Avera is not complete until it actually bakes. So if you turn now to page 124, there's a whole discussion about, was he aware of Shabbos or he forgot about Shabbos, he was a shogeg. And it seems like there's an emphasis on the moment of krimas panim, when the actual afiyah takes place. So it seemed, therefore, that the actual baking is part and parcel of the avera of afiyah, which means that in the case of the gleital, he would not be chayav because it only baked after Shabbos. Okay, now on page 124, we're going to talk a little about Sfiras HaOmer, which is a mitzvah that'll start in about 2 weeks. 2 weeks and change. And the Baal HaChinuch, who is one of the Rishonim, he brings a machlokes if he omitted one of the 49 days, does he have the mitzvah of Sfiras HaOmer or does he not? Meaning, is Sfiras HaOmer a complex mitzvah that's made up of 49 days, 49 countings, and you integrate all the 49 to create a mitzvah of Sfiras HaOmer? If you missed one day, then you don't have 49, you don't have the... Or do we say no? Sfiras HaOmer is not halacha merkeves. Every day is a mitzvah unto itself, and there's only one part to the mitzvah, the counting of that day. And now we want to talk about gerushin. In gerushin, there's the writing of the get, and then there's the delivery of the get, giving the get. What would you say? Is that, what's your knee-jerk response? Is that halacha merkeves?
Yes.
Why do you think yes? Because I thought no, but let me hear what you have to say.
Well, even without going into the details, it just the assumption it is halacha markav is because there's multiple parts. to the writing of the get.
Right, but again, halacha merkeves means that they're two parts of one whole. Now, I know you have to write a get before you deliver the get, but the gerushin itself, is it dependent on the ksivas I get? Does the writing of the get, it's like I have to buy a lulav in order to shake the lulav, but that doesn't make it halacha merkeves, right? There's only one action, namely the shaking of the lulav, but I have to buy the lulav and obtain it. I can't give a get unless I have a get written, but the writing of the get is not part of the gerushin. That's what we would have said. But the emes is that it's not so. That the writing of the get is actually part and parcel of the get itself, of the gerushin. It's not just a hechetimtza, we call it, meaning just a technicality. And how do we know this? Because the get has to be written lishma, and not only that, but once the get is written lishma, it's quite possible that he's not allowed to live with his wife. But that needs a lot of study. He has here bittul I get al yidei balach ksiva, fine. Not only that, guess what? Tosas says in Gittin Daf Ayin that at the time of the writing of the get, the Baal Hamagarish has to be shafui. Shafui means he has to be working with a full deck. I would have said that at the time of the Maisa Gerishon, when he delivers the get, he has to be shafui. He can't be a shota. But now we're saying that even at the time of the writing of the get, which has to be written lishma, we require that the Baal be completely shafui. And therefore it would seem that the beginning of the Maisa Gerishon is the writing of the get. And now we go on to page 125, and we'll wrap it up after this. And we're talking now about three regalim. So we have Sukkot and Pesach and Shavuos. They don't form a halacha merkeves. Each holiday, each moed, is an entity unto itself. However, there is one mitzarev that seems to link up all three regalim into one entity, and that's the mitzvah of re'iyas pnei habayis. Right? Every holiday requires that you go on aliyah to Yerushalayim, to the Beis Hamikdash. And you bring a special korban re'iyah, korban chagiga, korban simcha. Now the Torah formulates one mitzvah with regard to all three regalim. And it says, Shalosh pa'amim b'shana yirah kol zchurcha. B'chag hamatzos, b'chag hashuos, b'chag hasukos. In fact, the Rambam counts all the different dimensions of re'iyah, which means the re'iyah itself and the chagiga and the simcha, all as one mitzvah in Taryag. And not only that, but again, this gets really complicated, but you cannot be kovea one regel unto itself. When you kovea the regel, that kvius is chal on all three regalim at once. Means that there's some entity called kedushas hamoadim, which integrates all three moadim into one sanctity, into one kedusha. And the chasima of every bracha during every moed is Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadesh Yisrael v'Hazmanim. So you heard of the Torah Tmima. The Torah Tmima says it was a printing mistake. It shouldn't say Makadesh Yisrael Vazmanim, but the printer made a mistake. It said Vazmanim, meaning fill in the name of the Moed, whether it's Sukkot, and the printer made a mistake. Instead, he changed the nature of the bracha to Baruch Hashem Makadesh Yisrael Vazmanim. But you should really be making the bracha Makadesh Yisrael V'Yom HaSukkos, Makadesh Yisrael V'Yom HaShavuos. So Rav Soloveitchik said that's a big mistake. This is not Mekadesh Yisrael V'Hazmanim means because all three Kedushas of all three Moedim form one entity of Kedushas Hazman. So the last two parts here, which have to do with Melechas Shabbos with Ksiva, Makav Patish, Omer and Shtei Alechem. I mean, I don't want to botch it up now. It's very late. So I don't know if we'll get a chance maybe later on in the year to do it. But I'll take this opportunity to thank you and wish you a wonderful Bein Hazmanim, a wonderful Chag HaPesach. And we should continue steiging away with Londis.
Yes, thank you so much, Rob.
Okay, thank you so much. All the best.
Thank you.